you want to know how your deck stacks up against other decks in the meta, and today I have the answers for you, and well, mostly. Hey everybody, Nick from 9Card TCG, and today we're going to be looking at some top decks and how they stack up against other decks that are popular or doing well in the meta. Now, a lot of this information is not necessarily opinion. The information or the decks that I chose are based on really popular decks according to Limitless data, and then I guess before we get into the actual deck lists and how they stack up, subscribe, like, comment, all that kind of stuff. It tells YouTube this is a good channel. Especially share this information. Share this video with your friends or other people who play Pokemon. It helps so much. There's a link to Dragon Shield in the video description. I'm affiliated with them. And you can become a channel member if you're inclined, but none of that's ever expected. Just you being here watching is enough for me. Now, let's go ahead and we're going to try this a little bit different. And I want to know your thoughts on, do you like the way that this video is structured? Or do you want something a little bit different? But we'll get into it and you can tell me what you think. I do want to make mention that the individuals whose deck lists I'm using are all listed in the video description. So I'm not just stealing deck lists. You can find whose they are in the description. And I know this seems like a lot going on, but I want to show you the deck list and then how it stacks up with some other decks. And again, the ones I picked here are popular decks. Now, we're starting off with a Rapid Strike Urshifu deck. And I think Rapid Strike Urshifu is a pretty good deck despite what some of the matchup data might say. Unfortunately, at least at the moment, you have a tough matchup to Palkia and Mew. You're also kind of struggling against Dialga for some reason, just because I think they can hit really hard, and taking that extra turn can be really annoying. So, Dialga might be a little bit of a struggle, but Mew hits you for weakness. Palkia is just incredibly aggressive, and between doing things like scoop up nets and using something like Greninja to take out your Sobbles, can really put this deck into a tough spot. So Jake Gearhart kind of has a method for dealing this, at least with Mew, how you can improve the Mew matchup, and you should go check out his Twitter for information on that. This is not that list, so but one of the challenges with Urshifu that makes it so difficult is look at how many one-ofs there are. I mean, I can't even count that quickly how many one-ofs there are. It's a ton of one-ofs. And so it takes a lot of practice and a lot of dedication to get this deck down, really learn it, really be able to pilot it well. And unfortunately, sometimes you could be prone to poor draws because you're just not finding the things you need. You could be prone to poor prizing because you have so many one-ofs that it's just the thing you need gets prized. And if your Phoebe and Canceling Clone both get prized before you're able to deal with that Miltank, you're in a little bit of trouble. Otherwise, this deck is pretty good. You can beat Blissey Miltank pretty easily. You have a fair matchup with Arceus Inteleon. They do have Dunsparce and Manaphy often, but again, you have your Canceling Clone and Phoebe to kind of deal with that. Flying Pikachu, you're pretty neutral with. You have a slightly favored matchup against Arceus Duraludon. Regis, they're a single prize deck, so if you can pick off the right Pokemon, then you can really put that deck into a difficult position itself. But again, being a single prize deck, you kind of, your Gmax Rapid Flow does not necessarily hit them for KO, so now you're relying on things like Zigzagoon, which this deck doesn't run, but you're relying on Medicham to be able to Yoga Loop, which could be really, really useful, but I do think a Zigzagoon can be helpful to take like a little bit easier prizes, especially on something like a Reggie. Next on the list is Ice Rider Calyrex Vmax, and although it is a really good deck and it has the potential to knock out things like Palkia and Arceus in one hit, unfortunately you have some really tough matchups in the forms of Dialga, Mew, the aforementioned Palkia, and even the Regis can be a really difficult deck to deal with. Regis, one of the reasons they're so difficult is because it is a single prize deck, and that Registeel could put a real hurting on your Ice Riders, which are weak to metal. The same reason why Dialga is so difficult. That Metal Blast attack is going to, that damage is going to rack up super, super fast. So it doesn't really surprise me that those two matchups are difficult for you. Of course, Mew is just hyper aggressive. They don't need any damage modifiers to knock out your Ice Rider V. Just especially if they're going second, they can very easily turn one Melodious Echo KO your Ice Rider. So it can be a little challenging. You're often stuck in a Melanie loop, not always, as you can see with this deck here, but you often are stuck in that Melanie loop, so sometimes it's a little hard to play the Leon or play the boss's orders that you want to, because you have to always max Lance to take a knockout, or you did have to take the knockout the previous turn, whatever it is. So it is a good deck. You anything that's not Palkia and Mew or Dialga, you can probably do well against. Arceus Inteleon and Blissey, you're slightly favored against. Flying Pikachu, maybe not so much. It's a little unfavored, though. In all fairness, I do consider between like 46 and 47% to 53 or so percent to be pretty neutral. Then I think it kind of comes down to maybe your opponent just draws slightly better. Maybe you have some unfortunate pricing. That's where the RNG really does come in. So I don't think 47-48% win rate is very different from 50. It's still pretty neutral in my eyes. Unfortunately, Mew and Palkia are some of the most popular decks in the game, so having really tough matchups to those two decks makes it really hard to recommend this for someone who is a more seasoned competitive player. If you're just getting into the game, the League Battle deck is a great option, and you can definitely take it to locals and potentially do well with it, but at a higher competitive level, Ice Rider can be a little bit difficult. Moving on to the deck that I play the most right now, at least, is Arceus Inteleon. I absolutely love this deck, and there's a few reasons why. It has very neutral matchups against pretty much everything. There isn't anything that you take a hard loss to, and there isn't really anything that you will come out and auto win. One of the things that make Arceus decks so great is their adaptability to the meta. So if you know that fighting types are super common, well, you can have this Dunsparce, and if fighting types are nowhere to be found, you can cut the Dunsparce. And if you know that, man, there's a lot of lightning weak Pokemon, maybe you can throw in a Raikou and a Zeraora or some other lightning text. You can mold Arceus to be what you want, and that's part of its power. Another part of its power is how easy it is to set up between double turbo energies, Trinity Charge, and Trinity Nova. Sharon's Care to kind of heal and cycle through. Big Charms make you a pretty tough Pokemon to knock out if you're not getting hit for weakness. So everything here is pretty neutral. You do have a good matchup against, say, the Reggies, because that Dunsparce in play means they're never going to one-shot you. They might not even be able to two-shot you if you have a Big Charm in play. So, and then they hit you twice, you're not knocked out. You go ahead and take 2 KOs. Use Sharon's Care. You can Avery them down. There's a lot you could do. You can attack with Aqua Bullet to kind of offset prizes. There's just so much that you can do with this deck, particularly against a deck like the Reggies. Your toughest matchup is Palkia, and that's a 45%. It's not unwinnable by any means. I've beaten plenty of Palkia decks, mostly because I play something that has gives me a little bit of an edge against Palkias. And is it impossible? Can you still lose? Absolutely. Palkia is super powerful, but like I said, you can make this what you want it to be, and I make mine able to handle Palkia just a little bit easier. So there's really not too much to say again about this. Again, it's just very neutral. If you want something that's good against pretty much everything in the game, this is your best bet, and that's what I like. I'd rather take something that does well against everything, or gives me a good chance against everything, than something that has some really tough losses, and if I see them, then I just concede immediately. That's just me. It's Mew, right? I mean, there's kind of not much we can do about it. Even when all these dark types and dark packages were in play, you always have to account for Mew. Even now, even with it not being what a lot of people consider what the best deck in format, and that kind of goes to Palkia, spoilers, and you still have to at least think about it, and you still have to be able to beat Mew. It's still, according to Limitless data, the most popular deck in the game with about 11 or so % of the meta share. That means 1 out of every 10 decks. It doesn't sound like a lot, but you play enough games, you're gonna hit Mew. It's just what it is. There might be flavors of the day, there might be flavor of the week, but when you go into a tournament, expect Mew. And for good reasons. It does really well. It has pretty positive matchups against everything. Its weakest matchup is Reggie's with a 40%, but that does not mean that Mew cannot win. It absolutely can beat everything on this list. Urshifu, Calyrex are some really good matchups. Dialga's a pretty good matchup. You're neutral for the most part with Palkia, with Arceus, Blissey Miltank, surprisingly, because they are just so tanky. And it might be, once they get rid of your Meloetta, it might be a little bit difficult to deal with their Miltank. But yeah, Arceus Duraludon you're slightly favored against. You're slightly favored against Arceus Pikachu. I mean, what more could you want from a deck that has... It is so tried and true. I mean, there's... I don't think, aside from maybe some Arceus decks, which, because of the variability in Arceus builds, there is not a deck in the format at the moment that is as known and consistent as Mew. And when I say consistent, I mean consistently performs. Maybe not consistent in draws, because it's kind of all just luck at that point. But do you hit your heads on crams? Do you hit your heads on catches if you play? Are you able to draw into the stuff you want? Maybe not consistent like that, but it consistently does well. And so we have to include it. But yeah, I mean, I think at this point, most people are familiar with the Mew Vmax archetype. They just hit super hard. They can be super aggressive with Meloetta. Genesect and Meloetta are very dumb card designs, and I do not like either one of them. Small changes can make it so much better, but they just didn't. And I think I've, over the course of my time making videos since Fusion Strike came out, what seems like 9 years ago, but it really isn't. It's only like 7 or 8 months, whatever it is at this point. Not even a year. I've gone blue in the face talking about my displeasure for the whole Fusion Strike archetype. But anyway, Mew, it does really well. If you're looking for a deck that does well against everything, Mew is your answer. And it ultimately depends on what you are playing. Obviously, Arceus does really well against everything. Mew does really well against everything. And Palkia is going to do well against everything again. So, no surprise there. Before we get into the best deck in the format, if you haven't noticed, we're kind of going up in order here of, worst to best. But I think it would be... I'd be remiss to not mention Arceus Pikachu Crobat, because it won NAIC. I don't know if this is the exact list Azul used to win NAIC, but it looks pretty darn similar, and at least from what I remember off the stream and everything. But yeah, I mean, again, it's a pretty solid deck. You do struggle against things like Dialga, you do struggle against Arceus Duraludon, even regular Arceus Inteleon decks, you do have a little bit of a disadvantage against, but you're beating Palkia, you're beating Reggie's, and you're neutral to pretty much everything else. Now, part of the good thing is, being positive against Palkia it definitely outweighs being negative in, say, Arceus Duraludon, because the number of Palkia decks far outweighs the number of Arceus Duraludon decks, especially in a large tournament like NAIC or regional, a late night event. You are likely to encounter more Palkias than, say, Duraludons. It's just how it goes. Arceus Inteleon, however, you do have to worry a little bit about. They are a very powerful deck, and so Arceus Inteleon being your worst matchup is a little bit unfortunate, and you are slightly unfavored against Mew. But I mean, this is where it comes down to personal preference, and obviously Azul can take it to the very top of a 1,200 person tournament. You have to be real and ask yourself, are you Azul? Are you an Azul level player? I'm not. Nowhere near it. Maybe you are. I don't know. Maybe you're my level. Maybe you're between me and Azul. Maybe you're brand new and know nothing. I don't know. This is where deck selection and meta calling is really important. I'm not super comfortable with a deck like this. I just don't have enough experience and enough practice. I have a lot of practice with Arceus Inteleon. So these matchup numbers might not be the biggest deal to, say, someone like an Azul, an Isaiah Bradner, Gabe Smart, someone who is a really, really good player. But for the average player, they kind of matter a little bit. And of course, you know, playing a deck like this, just because you take a loss to, say, Arceus Duraludon, if you play against a brand new player and you're pretty good, you can definitely beat a new Arceus Duraludon player if they misplay, if you know how to take advantage of some opportunities. So don't just look at these matchups and be like, oh, I could never play Pikachu because I lose so hard to Duraludon. Who cares? You are going to probably do pretty well with a flying Pikachu deck like this. You have the Crobat for the Mew matchup, you have the Pikachus for the Palkia and other random water decks, Rapid Strike Inteleon, whatever, and then you have the Arceus for everything else. The Dunsparce is going to protect you against Urshifu decks. It's going to protect you against the random stray Galarian Zapdos. It really helps. You do have a Pumpkaboo for if you need to bump, say, path, so you can use your own Crobat. You have to use your Starburst if your opponent paths you turn 1. You have your options. There's just a lot going on here. It's a really good deck. And if you haven't tried it, I recommend it. Last, and certainly not least, because we're going in, worst to best order. So obviously the last one can't be the worst if the last one's the best. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. Palkia. It is such a strong deck. And I mean, come on, look at these matchups. You are beating Urshifu Inteleon pretty handily. You're beating the Regis. You're beating Dialga. You're beating Ice Rider. You are favored against Arc Intel. What are you losing to? Arceus Duraludon, Flying Pikachu. Okay, Flying Pikachu might be a big deal, especially again since it won NAIC. Palkia is really popular. People may be playing things. Once you're the best deck in the format, individuals are going to want to either play that or counter that. So, and of course, there's going to be everywhere in between. You're going to have people who play their favorite decks, or the decks that they're most comfortable with, the decks they have, whatever. But for those who have the resources, the cards, or whatever, you have to expect to be able to, or someone's going to come and try to counter you very hard. And so, yeah, Pikachu does that. But, I mean, for a hard counter to still be winning 40% of the time is really good. I mean, a real hard counter, you are losing 80% of the time. But you're not even... The number that I like to look for is 66%. If a deck is beating you 66% of the time or more, I consider that kind of an auto loss, or at least a very hard counter. Because in a best of 3 round, or a best of 3 match, like say a regionals or a lot of other tournaments are, they're going to beat you those 2 out of 3 times. Maybe you get the 1 win, maybe. But 2 out of 3 times, they're winning. You have a win-loss of, or a win rate of 40% against your best, or the best counter available to you at the moment. That's still pretty good. That means there is a chance that you're going to be winning against flying Pikachu decks, depending on how they set up, how you play the matchup. Are you able to find your cross switchers? Maybe you can get that Temple out before they're able to Trinity Nova on their first turn. Maybe you just have an insane turn. They don't know you're playing Starmie, and they Trinity Nova. You can boss up that Pikachu before it evolves. You KO it with Starmie. You could be in a pretty good position if you start doing things like that. You can use Inteleon and Greninja to kind of offset the prizes. You can destroy their Bibarel engine before it evolves using something like Greninja. There's so many things you can do. You have an answer for a lot of stuff. You can Roxanne Path, kind of try to lock them out of the game after you've knocked out their attackers, or at least the threat, the biggest threat they have. You can kind of go Roxanne Path and really just be like, okay, hope you draw super well, and put them at a, you know, in a position where it's like they're living on top deck mode. They're gonna have 3 cards in hand. Really, really challenging. Finding energies is really easy. You're gonna have, you know, say Tool Jammer to get rid of, or, you know, stop your opponent from having extra health, doing more damage, whatever. Having those free pivots after you knock out a Pokemon because it turns off Air Balloon. I mean, there's just so many things that this deck can do, and with the Star Portal ability being able to power up literally any Pokemon that you have, it's I mean, it's just so good. You attach for turn Star Portal to the active and a benched Palkia or Starmie, and there you go, 2 attackers ready to go. And that's not including the fact that you can Melanie to another one, like another Starmie. So you can get 2 energies on a Greninja, 1 energy on a Starmie, and still power up, you know, 2 Palkias, and then you're an attachment away the following turn from either a Greninja or a Starmie to continue your attack if you so choose. You'll still have the other Palkia, but man, there's so much you can do. You can get 5 energies in 1 turn. That's crazy. So yeah, a lot of stuff that you can do, and I don't see why. If you're looking to play the best deck at the moment, it is Palkia. That doesn't really have as much of a counter as people kind of want. There aren't as many really good lightning Pokemon, and the ones that we do have are very frail, so you're kind of trading one-shots with each other, and it just kind of comes down to who's going to be more consistent, and it's usually the Palkia. That's just why it does so well. Flying Pikachu being the one exception, but yeah, for the most part, that this is what's considered the best deck in the format at the moment. So there you go, some of the top 5 decks plus an honorable mention, and how they stack up against other popular decks in the meta. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found this a little informative. Let me know what you thought of the setup, and you know, in the future maybe I can look to make it a little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer, but this is kind of just a proof of concept. Let me know your thoughts. It really does matter, and I do read all the comments. So that's going to do it for us today. Thanks so much. You know, follow me on Twitter, join the Discord, all that kind of stuff. Everything's in the video description, and I will see you next time.